Yo, it would appear that it is that time again. The time when the darkness is embraced, and we all sit around the lights of those carved out before us, masked and enveloped in shadow still, becoming shapes once more. So anyway, today I want to talk about and rank all the Halloween films. Halloween is a slasher movie franchise about a mass killer named Michael Myers, who goes around killing people at night, Halloween night specifically. There's more to it than that, but at its core, most films in this franchise can be described as such, and yet this very simple concept has not only made a franchise that has lasted longer than 40 years, but with 13 films under his belt as well, all ranging in quality from pure cinema masterpieces, in my opinion, to pretty damn bad, to say the least. The series has gone through not one, not two, but 3 separate reboots, with a ton of different timelines and interpretations of the core characters, themes, and there's even a film in there that has nothing to do with Michael Myers, and everything to do with Stonehenge and pagan rituals, and mass media indoctrinating us all and ruining the lives of our children. If you're lost or don't really know much about this series, then trust me, it'll make much more sense later. I've seen all the movies in this series countless times at this point, and it's a bit of a tradition to watch at least a few of them come every October as well. So with that in mind, I invite you all to join me in carving our way through this franchise right to its gooey, seed-filled center, and see not only what makes it so iconic, but also hear my various hot and cold takes alike on this beloved franchise full of both tricks and treats. Starting with the classic that started it all, Halloween. Released on October 25th of 1978 and directed by John Carpenter, Halloween is a film that not only started this whole franchise, but was also responsible for the craze that would be the slasher movie genre that would boom in the 80s, with countless films and very popular series like Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Child's Play owing their very existence in large part to this film's success. But I am getting a bit ahead of myself. After all, while it's easy to see this movie as the start of something big, truth be told, it started out as something very humble, and in its own way stands on its own, separate from everything else that would come after it. The film starts on the night of Halloween in 1963, in the suburban Illinois town of Haddonfield, where a 6-year-old named Michael Myers would come to brutally stab his older teenage sister Judith to death, for seemingly no reason whatsoever. Afterward, we skip ahead 15 years to the night before Halloween, when Michael, after being under the care and watch of Dr. Loomis and being completely mute, devoid of all emotion all this time, suddenly escapes and is on his way back to his hometown to kill more innocent lives, all while Dr. Loomis, who is convinced that Michael is more than just an insane person, but rather that he is an embodiment of evil itself, tries to track him down and stop him, with our focus shifting eventually to that of the teenager Laurie Strode, and her friends who are the unfortunate few whom Michael has chosen to stalk and kill tonight on Halloween. That's the basic premise, and truth be told, in a post-Halloween world, it's kind of a stereotypical plot for a slasher story. But that's the thing, so many of those conventions, tropes, and concepts that would come to accompany slasher films first started here. However, in my personal opinion, Halloween is the one that did it the best overall. First of all, the film is shot beautifully. It is all being shot in Southern California. The film goes between these picturesque little sleepy town moments, autumn leaves darting across the ground, to shots that emanate a pure ominous glare, shots like Michael standing outside the house in the middle of the night, or when he appears from the shadows. Adding to that, while I certainly won't be able to show much of the soundtrack due to copyright reasons, the soundtrack for this movie is extremely iconic, and for a good reason. It's done basically entirely off a synth piano and composed by the film's director, Carpenter himself. The soundtrack seems to go between two extremes, one being that of pure suspenseful atmosphere, capturing what I would call a quiet stillness, the piano notes often being used in a repetitive motion, while the more heavy synth sounds seem to insist that something is not quite right. If I were to describe it, I'd say it's the soundtrack of sitting alone in your bedroom, or in a place all by yourself, and pure and simple mundanity. But then you just feel like something is a bit off. Could be a trick of the mind, but then again, maybe there really is something wrong, just around that corner. The other extreme would be the intense chase music, which I think captures, being chased by a masked killer really well. It's pure adrenaline. Halloween is also written in a rather interesting way that takes what is a simple concept and elevates it to something so much more. That being that Michael is not merely just a killer, but the concept of evil itself. Something that was noted by the co-screenplay writer to John Carpenter, Deborah Hill, noting, quote, "The idea was that you couldn't kill evil, and that was how we came about the story. We went back to the old idea of Samhain, that Halloween was the night where all the souls are let out to wreak havoc on the living, and then came up with the story about the most evil kid who ever lived. And when John came up with the fable of a town with a dark secret of someone who once lived there, and now that evil has come back, that's what made Halloween work." Unquote. This concept is the through line for which all the characters in the film are connected, the most obvious being Dr. Loomis, who is one of the only adults in the movie that seems to understand what Michael is. From the start of the film, he doesn't believe Michael can be rehabilitated, and tries his best to warn others of the danger they are facing, but most seem to see him as off his rocker, or that he's being too dramatic. This culminates in a speech in which Loomis delivers to the chief of the police about exactly how he came to this conclusion that Michael is more than just a man. Him saying, quote, "I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left. No reason, no conscience, no understanding, even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, of good or evil, right or wrong. I met this 6-year-old child with a blank, pale, emotionless face, and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up, because I realized what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil." Unquote. More than that, he doesn't even like referring to Michael as him, but rather it, or simply death. This strange aura and almost mystical nature that's given to the killer is then followed through by how our teen girls, notably the babysitter Laurie Strode, sees him, a strange man in a mask who just as soon as she sees him, disappears. Hell, in one of the shots, she's looking out into her backyard through her bedroom window and sees Michael there, only for the shot to change to her expression and back to the backyard, only for him to be gone yet again. This is important because either his visage has gone into her mind where she is now seeing things, or perhaps the more interesting concept is that he actually was there. And that is perhaps one of the most creepy concepts I could think of. Because you see, usually this trope is done in other horror films where the person looks at, like, what they think is someone being there, and then they look away for a moment, and suddenly the danger disappears. While that sort of quick timing does seem supernatural, it leaves even the smallest little bit of room for them, booking it as fast as they can whenever the person looks away. But here, Michael literally fucking evaporates as if he never existed in that space to start with. Which is interesting because Michael in general has very strange movements. movements. Every motion he takes seems slow, calculated. Even whenever he later on chases Laurie Strode, he never runs, but simply walks to her. Laurie Strode is also a sweet, book-smart girl who takes genuine care of the two kids she ends up babysitting in the film, especially when kid Tommy Doyle is having real issues tackling the concept of the boogeyman, something told to him by some of the older kids at his school. Tommy sort of becomes obsessed with the idea of the boogeyman, some monster who will end up coming to get him on Halloween night. Laurie, however, assures him that the boogeyman doesn't exist, and that there is nothing to be afraid of. But as the night goes on, Tommy sees outside a man cast in shadow, a shape in the darkness. And it's in that moment that, perhaps not unlike that of Dr. Loomis, Tommy innately sees him for what he is, the boogeyman. Michael, as the film goes on, kills Laurie's friends that night, stalking them, watching them, before killing them suddenly without a word. There's a strange, almost mechanical way to how he does so too, highlighted best by perhaps when he kills Linda's boyfriend Bob, stabbing him into a wall and then simply staring and tilting his head, like an animal almost observing his kill. When he hears a dog barking, alerting Annie to his presence, he kills it without hesitation. When he eventually kills Annie, it's after there have been multiple times when he could have done so already, building both suspense for the viewer, but also calling into question why he didn't do it before, with the answer never being totally clear. Same as when he dresses in Bob's ghost costume to seemingly trick Linda into thinking Bob was playing a trick on her, only to then simply stand and stare at her, only killing her once she gets on the phone with Laurie, perhaps to lure Laurie over to the house across the street, where he has made a house of horrors for her to witness, highlighting his cruelty as he steps out from the darkness and stabs into her. The film from that point onward is simply amazing, with one of the best chase scenes and struggles for survival in the genre, which I would say is actually one of the most important parts of any good slasher film. In the same way an action film needs good action scenes, or a mystery needs a good payoff and solution, slashers need good chase scenes, as it's the apex of the tension in the film. Many would argue that it's the kills that are the most important part of any slasher film, but that's really not true at all, especially with some of the worst of the genre in my opinion, depending solely on kills and shock value without any real build-up or tension. At some point, it just kinda becomes boring. At any rate, by the end of this film, we are left seeing Laurie pull the mask off of Michael, something which prompts him to immediately put it back on, which is sorta interesting because he has at this point been stabbed in the neck, in the chest, and in the eye, but the only thing he really seemed to care about was getting that mask back on. And then Dr. Loomis is there to unload his gun into Michael, saving both Laurie as well as knocking him off a balcony down into the ground below, prompting Laurie to ask Loomis if that was the boogeyman, which Loomis confirms it in fact was, then taking a look down only to see nothing. Michael, it seems, had gotten back up and walked away, unfazed by the bullets. Or perhaps they never truly hit him at all. Michael was now gone and could be anywhere, because he is evil, darkness. He is the boogeyman, and just as Loomis had insisted, was not simply a man, but a concept given the shape of a human, which is why in the end credits, Michael's name is not given, but he is instead referred to as simply the Shape. Pure evil in human form with no motivation, no emotion, and could be anywhere at any time. That is why Halloween is such an amazing film, more than simply a slasher movie, but also a movie about a force of nature, that of evil, and how it can invite itself into anyone's home when you least expect it, looming in the minds of children, ignored by those more logically minded, and unfazed by even those who persist to stop it, because evil can never fully die. Obviously, if I were to rank this film on a list, it would be pretty high to say the least. In fact, I'm putting it in a league of its own. It's not simply S tier, it's Halloween tier, because no matter how good or bad it gets with the sequels, this film stands on its own, and is highly recommended by me as a must-watch if you're into horror films and this sort of stuff in general, I suppose. That being said, I think that's enough glazing from me. It's time we now discuss this film's 12 sequels, starting with, what else but, Halloween 2, released in 1981, directed by Rick Rosenthal, and written and produced by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill again. This film, story-wise, takes place the exact same night as the original movie, with Michael walking away into the night, Laurie Strode being sent to the hospital to recover from her injuries she obtained over the fight with the Shape, and Dr. Loomis once again trying to find where Michael went. It's a pretty interesting choice having the whole sequel take place on the same night. Must seriously be a contender for one of the longest Halloween nights ever. Shit. However, it does work well in getting us right back into the swing of things, though I will say that some of the direction does feel a bit different here from the first one, though them getting this close to them both feeling cohesively together is at least pretty admirable. Back in the day, when I used to watch these films as a kid, I always loved watching these two movies back to back for this very reason. Though one noticeable difference between this movie and the first is Michael himself being played by a different actor. See, in the original, he was played by Nick Castle, as well as Tony Moran, for when he gets his mask taken off briefly. And Nick Castle is often credited for how well he portrayed the Shape and helped define his character through body language alone. And actually, in this second film, the new actor, Dick Warlock, also does a pretty wonderful job at doing that as well. The only small issue is, well, his head is too big for the original mask, and this results in a rather strange, stretched look that changes much of the profile of Michael's face. One that's not terrible, mind you, in my opinion. In fact, again, as a kid, I used to headcanon that the reason he looked this way was because the mask was molding more to his face, as he slowly comes to embody evil more and more and whatever. But it does make his eyes much more visible in some shots, which I prefer when they are mostly cast in complete and utter darkness. That aside though, most of the film is shot in such a way, in dark lights, that even though it is a little weird looking at times, it still looks pretty damn creepy. And spoiler alert, as we go through these films, the masks are going to continue to not be so great. So this is actually not too bad considering where we end up later. That detail aside, much of the rest of the film follows the plot of Michael as he continues to kill more innocent people on this cursed night, slowly making his way to the hospital that Laurie, the victim who got away, is at, to finish the job it would seem, which is quite bad for her since she's not only badly injured, but she's also drugged up and can barely walk at all, adding to the suspense as Michael slowly kills everyone around her, the walls closing in one by one, as Loomis and the police get caught up in a red herring as well. One thing I'll say off the bat is this film is definitely much more violent than the first movie, as that film had most of its kills cast in shadows, or not fully shown on screen, or just were not nearly as brutal as, say, Michael plunging a nurse's head over and over and over into boiling water until she's scarred and blistered and drowns in it. This was no doubt a choice to up the ante on violence, as well as follow suit with the last few years of slasher films that the original came to inspire, like that of Friday the 13th, for example, where elaborate practical special effects for the gore on kills was starting to become expected of the genre. However, suspense is still key here, and nearly every kill happens only after minutes of build-up and tension. One of my favorite scenes in the film is when an old couple is seeing the news reports of a mass killer on the loose, killing people, and we get these few haunting shots of Michael walking into their house while they aren't looking, the both of them enraptured in paying attention to the news, as he slowly grabs the kitchen knife from the butcher block in their kitchen. It's really great stuff. The soundtrack is also great here again, once more being done by John Carpenter, as he adds a bit more to the OST this time. In particular, the reprise of The Shape Stalks in this film is amazing, and gives me chills every time I hear it. The setting of a hospital is also one that I've heard some say they aren't a fan of, and while it taking place in one place, for the vast majority of the film, I can understand not being to some's liking. I actually find it really creepy as a setting. It makes everything involving Laurie and Michael, in particular some of the amazing chase scenes in this film, which I will full on argue are way better than even the original films, have a real sense of claustrophobia. And it's part of why I find Halloween 2 to be a really great sequel, and overall a really great follow-up to the original. Though, there is something in retrospect that I used to not mind as much, but with time, I will say, is a plot element that I'm not so sure was for the best. That being the twist that Laurie Strode is actually Michael Myers' baby sister. This twist was mostly done to give Michael Myers motivation for why he pursues her so incessantly, something which I suppose adds a connection between the protagonist and antagonist as well, and something which she only really comes to understand by the movie's finale. But the thing is, I would argue that this was actually a really dumb and short-sighted choice. Firstly, because again, to me, giving Michael a motivation sort of takes away from the character's mystique. It also, in my opinion, makes him less scary, as if he has no motivation, he can attack anyone, anywhere, and exists as a concept of evil. And I suppose he can still be that while also wanting to kill his other sister, not necessarily something that completely breaks that concept by any means. But I don't know, it feels a little misguided and out of left field. Not to mention, I'm not sure why he needs to be her brother for him to pursue her more. I mean, he was already stalking her to begin with, right? He intended to kill her and she got away from his rampage. He loves stalking and toying with his victims. Isn't that enough of a reason for him to go after her to try to finish the job? The main reason I harp on this so much is because, again, I often find people say, well, these movies won't make sense for him to go after Laurie if she's not his sister, and I just kind of feel like people are gaslighting themselves into just forgetting that the original movie, she was never his sister to begin with, and he pursued her and tried to kill her. He's pure evil. Of course he would still go after her to finish the job. Why wouldn't he? In fact, it makes it even more scary when Laurie might wonder, why me? Why is he going after me? And no matter what answer she's given, there truly is no answer. That, to me, is actually a lot more creepy. And the other reason I harp on this is that because for many years, and you'll find the vast majority of this film's franchise, will now focus on this one particular plot point for nearly its entire run, which, while it doesn't do too much damage in Halloween 2 in my personal opinion, since it's mostly just kind of a basic motivation that kind of starts and ends there, as the sequels go on and this becomes Michael's main focus, all of his character that was a concept, a blank canvas, a mystery, suddenly turns into a solved mystery, a painted canvas, a man with a set goal, and thus a predictable villain as well. But despite all that, I still think Halloween 2 is a damn good movie for what it sets out to do. And the finale is also truly great, with Loomis and Laurie teaming up and trying to run away from Michael as he goes on yet another rampage. And eventually, Dr. Loomis, with his quick wits, along with Laurie and her apparently quite good gun skills shooting out both of Michael Myers' eyes, both end up defeating the Shape, as Loomis manages to help Laurie escape and then sacrifices himself, casting both he and the Shape of Evil into an explosion of flames that Michael still manages to walk out with fully engulfed, before finally collapsing, dying perhaps one of the more symbolic means for evil, in sacrificial flames. Overall, while these days I'm not really a fan of the brother-sister plot twist, it's still a really damn good sequel, and one that I feel like I see gets way too much flack from the fanbase these days. And for all these reasons, I'm personally putting Halloween 2 in S tier. But with that movie out of the way, it's time for a extreme change of tone, with Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, released on October of 1982. This film always feels really weird to compare to the other movies here, since it really has nothing to do with the rest of the franchise, and for that reason, I'm not sure where to place it. I will say that the film conceptually was supposed to be the start of the Halloween franchise being an anthology series, since the name Halloween sort of does work for just making any story that has to do with Halloween, I suppose. The plot of the film follows Dr. Dan Chalice, who investigates a mysterious mask-making company called Silver Shamrock Novelties, after a man dies clutching one of their Halloween masks. Chalice and his partner, Ellie, discover that the company's owner, Colonel Cochran, has a sinister plan involving these masks, all of which are embedded with fragments of Stonehenge, and powered by dark magic and tech that are designed to kill children when triggered by a special TV commercial on Halloween night. And so the movie builds to a race against time as Chalice tries to stop the deadly broadcast before millions of kids are slaughtered in a horrific ritual sacrifice. Now that really is summarizing a lot, but as you can see, the film does have some interesting concepts, with I'd say its overarching themes being about Halloween as a concept originating from pagan sacrifice, Samhain not simply being a theme but a central plot point now, as well as the obvious consumerism and mass media control elements that come from something like a holiday being turned into something to sell products. The silver shamrock masks are marketed aggressively through constant TV ads, showing how corporations can manipulate people, especially children, into buying products that hide sinister purposes. The deadly commercials highlighting a particular fear of advertisers' influence on society. And it's also kind of like an ironic turn to tradition with it all being about Samhain, but at the same time sort of modernizing it by selling it through a product for the express purpose of mass sacrifice. When the film first came out back in the day, it was lambasted, and it was mostly because people expected, or more so wanted, another film with Michael Myers. And so this movie was never really given much of a chance back then to stand on its own. But these days, the movie is often considered a cult classic that does stand on its own, and is in my opinion a great, even amazing film in its own right, especially for its extremely Halloweeny fall atmosphere and aesthetics, as well as its general themes and concepts at play. But where do I place it on this tier list? Well, again, it's hard to really compare it to the other films since it is so different, but as its own movie with its own unique concepts and stuff, the more I've watched it, the more I've grown to really appreciate it. And for all these reasons, I think it deserves to go into the A tier. But with that said, I suppose it's now time to jump back into the world of the shape of evil himself. Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, released on October of 1988, marks the first time the series' original creator John Carpenter and Deborah Hill having no direct involvement with the series, which is significant in that now the new director and screenwriters needed to come up with a way for Michael Myers to come back from being, well, literally burned alive. But he is the boogeyman, a living concept of evil, so I suppose it only makes sense even fire would not be enough to kill him. And thus the plot opens on October 30th of 1988, after Michael Myers has been in a comatose state for 10 years. Why they didn't just kill him or euthanize him at this point is beyond anyone's guess. Maybe they tried and it didn't work? Though, considering Loomis is the main one who seems to want him dead, and the legal system seems to always find a way to protect Michael Myers because he has mental issues, no matter how many lives must be sacrificed for upholding this law, maybe there is some commentary there that I'm sure isn't too difficult to read into. At any rate, as you might imagine though, tonight is the night Michael reawakens because he has heard that he now has a niece in the form of Laurie Strode's daughter, Jamie Lloyd. And since he's hell-bent on killing everyone in his family line, this wakes the Shape up. He kills everyone in quite a brutal fashion, makes his escape, and makes his way back to Haddonfield once more. But Dr. Loomis also survived that explosion, with scars on his face no less. And once he hears of Michael Myers' escape, he knows what he must do. He must once again pursue the evil and try to stop it. All this while Jamie is dealing with the death of her mother Laurie, and she's now an orphan living with foster parents. But every night, she seems to be having terrible nightmares about the Shape trying to kill her, a nightmare that will soon become a reality. I said in retrospect I'm not a big fan of Michael having to kill his whole family motive, but we're deep into that now, so there's no use complaining any further about it. So let's talk about the actual quality of the film. And for what it is, Halloween 4 is actually a pretty damn good Halloween movie. It's opening on a farm full of Halloween decorations mixed with a more quiet ambient soundtrack is actually one of my favorite openings for the series. And then we have Jamie, who does a really good job at not only being a child protagonist, but also there is something extra scary and disturbing about the shape specifically targeting a young child. I suppose they were never necessarily off the table for him, but it makes the suspense of the whole situation all the more dire. I also like her and her older foster sister, Rachel's dynamic, and them along with the story of finding family after your old one was so tragically taken from you, all while there is this monster from the past coming to kill you, consume you into the old. It's actually a pretty damn good story, and I also really love Loomis here, as he's both a bit more deranged than last time, as you might expect, but also he really is living up to a sort of Van Helsing to Michael's Dracula here. And I do like the idea that him living, as well as the evil living, sort of puts a new spin on that concept of evil changing shape. That being that perhaps, so long as there is evil that can never die, there will always be those that oppose evil as well. The human spirit, the good in us all finding a way to always conquer it. However, there are some issues with the film, the biggest one honestly being Michael Myers' mask. By this point, the original mask, which was a William Shatner mask painted white and with scruffed up hair by the way, had been pretty well beaten up, and so they needed a new mask and ended up ordering one from the same people who made the original. And sadly, they ended up giving them something that really didn't look much like the original. In theory, this shouldn't have mattered since they now have the budget and time. It is a Halloween movie after all, it holds some credit, right? They could just make their own mask that looks as similar to the original as possible. This, unfortunately, did not transpire though. So we ended up going from this to this. A massive downgrade that not only lacks many of the details of the original mask, but it also kinda looks cheap as fuck as well, like actual $20 or $15 cheap imitation stuff, and does kind of ruin the atmosphere of some of the scenes, I'm not gonna lie. There is an in-universe reason for why the mask looks this way, since it's just something Michael grabbed off of a shelf since it was Halloween time. But at the end of the day, that's just an excuse for it looking like shit. It really should not have looked this way, and sadly this will continue to be an ongoing issue to some degree from this point onward, with nearly every movie having different masks, and nearly none of them getting it quite right. Some are closer than others, and some are even worse than this one. I'll give it this one can kind of grow on you after a bit, and in large part that is due to the way this film is shot, the lighting, and just general cinematography being really good. Michael is also pretty damn crazy in this film and does some wild stuff like jamming his thumb into someone's forehead through sheer force, or having a shotgun and instead of using it to shoot a person, stabbing it through them and jamming them into a wall. Wild shit. Some of the chase scenes are also really damn good in this movie as well. And again, Jamie does make for an interesting protagonist, especially by the end of the film, when Michael is ultimately killed, or at least for now, by a cop and a bunch of town forming a mob to shoot him up till that fucker doesn't get back up, and him falling down a well of some sort, seemingly dead. And that's when the twist of the film happens, when all seems safe and sound, and it seems like the evil is finally dead. That message, evil never dies, it only changes shape, finally fully comes full circle, as randomly out of nowhere, Jamie then puts on a mask, grabs a pair of scissors, and while her foster mother is setting a bath for her, Jamie brutally stabs and kills her own foster mother. Like uncle, like niece, I suppose. And Dr. Loomis screams in horror at the tragedy of it all, as he realizes that the evil that was in Michael Myers was passed on, changed shape, and entered into Jamie. A very haunting ending. And it's this twist that sort of recontextualizes the whole movie, as Jamie slowly being possessed and taken over by this concept of evil. What makes it all more tragic is Loomis fought so hard to destroy the evil, only to then see it finally get passed on to the next generation. Him now knowing that he has fully failed, and that sadly the evil will persist. Now, knowing what the sequels will eventually do with this scenario does kind of make this a overall extreme disappointment. But in a vacuum, I really love the concept that Michael finally died dying allowed the evil, this concept, this force of nature, or fate, to change shape into someone else fully. Which, in a way, despite Michael dying, is kind of like the ultimate victory that he could possibly have, isn't it? That no matter what you do, even if you actually kill him, the evil will not die, for it is a concept, not a man. And the more I've watched Halloween 4, the more it's grown on me more and more as one of my favorites in the series. If only Michael had just had a better fucking mask. But in the end, I can't dock points for it just having a goofy mask. After all, the film is overall very strong, and what I would definitely call another S-tier Halloween movie. I promise they won't all be S-tiers, by the way. I do know that opinion in particular can be sort of controversial, but I think what really edges it out and makes it an S-tier is beyond just the theme and everything else, is also just the way the film is shot in this very lived-in feeling Haddonfield, something that even the original couldn't quite get across. Although it was very quiet and seemed quite quaint, here there are kids running all around, trick-or-treating. It's lively and full of people just living their lives, which makes it all the more interesting when Michael Myers in the movie ends up destroying all the power to the area, quite literally casting a shadow and darkness over the entire town. It's great as a scene setup, but also symbolically is really clever. So yeah, Halloween 4, banger of a film. And unfortunately, it's gonna be all downhill from here for a little bit. Starting with Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, released in 1989, is a direct follow-up to 4. Taking place 1 year later, sees Jamie now admitted to a children's hospital and has been rendered a mute, her taking extreme PTSD and general psychological trauma from what happened last Halloween. Meanwhile, Michael Myers didn't end up dying, surprise surprise, as you probably guessed, and is now back alive a year later to come and try and kill Jamie once and for all. And, before you ask, no, the plot point of the evil passing on to her is not followed up on pretty much at all. In fact, it's actually dropped entirely, as a matter of fact. This is very disappointing, because even if they still wanted Michael Myers alive, I think her possibly having violent attacks and maybe even struggling between that evil inside of her and the good in her too could have been a really interesting direction to go down for the series and narratively for her character. Jimmy does, however, have a nightmare and seemingly telepathic connection to Michael Myers, I guess. And there's actually a pretty creepy nightmare scene with her in the hospital and running through this medical area while Michael seemingly is around every corner. I remember as a kid really freaking me out. Michael Myers himself in this film managed to survive the barrage of bullets from last time by floating down a river, getting saved by some old hermit, and him just letting him rest there, I guess, for an entire fucking year, until Michael wakes up around Halloween night, kills the hermit, and is back on his way to kill Jamie and everyone else he comes across, I suppose. I'm not sure why we really even needed this explanation, though. Bro has been shot multiple times and burned alive. Honestly, I think it's scarier / more interesting to just have it all be a mystery as to where the fuck he went for a year. I really don't think we even need an explanation. Just say when they went looking for his body, they found no body, and really, that's all you need to do. At any rate though, Michael also has a new mask in this film, and it's really fucking bad. I guess it has more details than the fourth one, but it also looks very strange. Like it has pursed lips. The hair is way too long, and the whole thing sits in a strange way on the actor's head, almost as if it's too big for his head, or maybe it's just the neck flares that are just way too long that are not tucked inside of his outfit. Man, I don't know, it's a lot of things. It looks like absolute shit, let's just be real. And I do think it is overall worse than the fourth film's mask. Though to be honest, they are bad in completely opposite directions. But yeah. The other big thing in this film is despite Jamie's older foster sister being such a strong central character in the fourth film that I actually really grew to like, she is kind of unceremoniously killed off in this film, which is confusing because most of the film Jamie is in a hospital and Loomis is also at that hospital, screaming and yelling at her mostly, which just kind of comes off as sort of creepy and mean-spirited at some point rather than anything else. So it kind of feels like this would have been a time for Rachel to have more character development since she's the one that's going to be actively out there. But no, she just gets killed off, and instead the teen that we choose to focus on more is Tina, Rachel's friend, who is well, how do I put this? Fucking insufferable, and a overall very obnoxious character with very bizarre writing. Actually, the writing and much of the direction of this film feels really all over the place in general, because as I said before, Loomis thinks that Jamie's connection with Michael is the key to defeating him for good, and so he's like screaming at her constantly and trying to fucking get her to give him answers as to where Michael is, despite her clearly not knowing what the fuck is going on and being a literal child who is mute. Rachel is killed off without warning or even really much emotional weight, despite how much they really focused on her and Jamie's relationship in the last film. Feels very disrespectful and just kind of worthless as a death. Tina and her escapades at some Halloween barn are literally some of the most boring storylines and scenes in the whole series, and yet there are multiple minutes and scenes and set pieces all set around this fucking party and group of friends that have nothing to do with the rest of the story. Oh, and then there are these two cops who are always having this accompanying slapstick dumbass music whenever they are around or talking for whatever reason. Michael Myers being able to come back to life after death is still not taken seriously enough by others besides Loomis and Jamie, apparently. And all the while, this strange figure in a admittingly very cool coat and sick set of boots is walking around the town, seemingly aware and watching Michael and doing mysterious and evil things, ? A character which alludes to some greater mystery or answer to Michael Myers' seemingly supernatural abilities and what have you, that the directors and writers have literally gone on record saying they included in the movie because they wanted to allude to something that they didn't know the answer to. As in, who this character is, what they represent, what their goals are, and ultimately what point any of this is going to have in this movie or the next. No one actually knew, and no one took the time to even figure it out, because this movie was also really rushed out because of the success of Halloween 4 being so large. They felt like they just had to release another one the very next year and didn't take the time that was needed to write something that actually makes sense or was a proper follow-up. And all of this is a lot to take in, and yet, worst of all, outside of the finale of this film, this movie is super boring, if I'm gonna be real. So much of this film really does feel like a blur at times, and it feels like every time I watch it, half of it leaves my mind the moment the credits roll. Now mind you, I will give credit where it's due. This film does have one of the most suspenseful scenes to me, in my personal opinion, when Jamie and Michael are inside the old Myers house and he's after her. In particular, the scenes where she is trying to climb up a laundry chute while he's at the bottom, stabbing into it, trying to get her as she keeps sliding back down and has to climb her way up to the top. It's a really, really well done scene. But at the same time, the scene right after this with Jamie talking to Michael and asking him to take his mask off and him crying a tear at her is just, I don't know, it's weird and sort of feels like it really takes things too far with Michael at this point. Now he's feeling emotions and crying? It's just kinda lame. Hashtag not my Michael. On top of that, in the finale, he gets captured after being baited by Loomis to come and kill this little girl over and over again, before then being brutally beaten by Loomis over and over and over again. Honestly though, I guess I can't blame Loomis for just going off like this after how many movies he's been in and had to deal with this shit. But then Loomis seemingly has a stroke, and then Michael is just sort of captured, put in a prison cell, and we have this scene of him just sort of playing with his chains, which has gotta be definitely the most pathetic look we've ever had at the Shape, to be real. But regardless, then suddenly at the very end of the movie, the man in the black coat kills all the police officers and breaks Michael out of the prison, causing Jamie to scream and cry in terror that her nightmare, her whole family, foster family, friends, everyone she knows and loves is dead. And now Michael has escaped with the help of this mysterious, evil, black-coated figure. Her nightmare is still not over. I could go on, but I think you get the point. This film is by far the messiest in the series thus far. It has a couple of cool and suspenseful scenes, but besides that, that's really all it's got going for it. It overall just kind of feels like missed potential and a waste of time for everyone involved. And that's why I am personally putting this film in D tier. It's not as bad as some of the stuff we're going to get a little later, but it's still pretty fucking worthless on the whole. And speaking of worthless, Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, released in 1995, and is the ultimate culmination of this trilogy of Halloween films, about Jamie and what would come to be the core defining concept of the trilogy, the Cult of Thorn. So, first of all, I need to note that there are actually two different versions of this film, the theatrical cut and the producer's cut, that only ever came out years later, first through a leak and then officially through a Scream Factory Blu-ray. And they have significant differences with the plot of the movie. So first I'll be talking about the theatrical cut, and I'll be ranking them both individually. So first of all, the film takes place 6 years after Michael escapes from prison. Both him and Jamie were abducted by the man in black in his cult at an unknown facility with medical staff. By Hallows Eve, a now 15-year-old Jamie has been impregnated and gives birth, before then escaping the facility with her baby in tow as Michael begins his pursuit. This ultimately leads to Jamie hiding her baby and having Michael catching up to her, and him killing her sacrificing herself for the safety of her child. But you just know Michael's gonna have to kill that baby now. Luckily, Jamie cried for help via radio before she died, and this compels both the retired Dr. Loomis into action again, but also that of Tommy Doyle, the boy who Laurie babysat on that fateful night in the first film, who ever since then, as they've grown up, has grown more obsessed with the mystery of Michael Myers, the boogeyman, and what supernatural force seems to compel him and give him this ability to persist beyond death. He ends up tracking down the call to a bus station and finds Jamie's baby, whom he names Steven, and also crosses paths with Loomis there. Oh, and I guess I should also note, the Strode family, relatives of Laurie's adoptive parents, now live in Michael's childhood home, unaware of his dark past. Fucking somehow. Kara Strode is a single mother raising her son Danny, who begins hearing voices telling him to kill, much like young Michael did decades earlier. Kara Strode and Tommy Doyle soon join forces after Tommy saves her and Danny from Michael during one of his attacks. And now all the pieces are together for another showdown. But before I get into that, I have to note that all the stuff that happens in the intro of the film has gotta be some of the most disappointing and wildly strange decisions creatively that I have ever come to see. Firstly, with Jamie, after surviving 2 whole films and being the central core character of this trilogy, getting brutally killed by Michael almost immediately as the film starts, but also this cult in general, and the fact that they just impregnated this 15-year-old with a child. When did this happen? And who is the father? Well, that is, one of the weirdest parts of this film. See, I suppose I should explain that in this movie, the core idea is that they wanted to finally explain why Michael Myers is immortal, and why he feels the need to kill his own family. And this is explained because he is compelled by the Cult of Thorn. This cult has apparently been controlling Michael, and is what compels him to kill his own bloodline using the ancient Celtic rune of Thorn. And in the theatrical cut, they apparently impregnated Jamie through genetic testing and science shit that's never fully explained, but basically it amounts to Michael's DNA being put into Jamie, meaning that Michael, Jamie's uncle, is the father of the child. No, I am not kidding. I suppose I can at least say that in the producer's cut, this is changed to Michael seemingly, commanding Jamie to be impregnated with his seed, like, supernaturally. But no matter which way you slice it, it's really, really fucking weird. I also hate the idea of, number one, taking away all the mystery of Michael Myers, removing the idea of him being a concept, but also taking away even his agency by being a pawn in some cult's game that we have never seen or even heard of up until now. A cult that controls Michael and probably did some weird things with him to get that DNA in the theatrical cut. It's genuinely such a bizarre creative choice that it baffles me that they ever thought this was a good idea. And the worst part is, having a cult that centers around worshipping Michael as an entity of pure evil is actually kind of interesting. It's not the worst idea in the world, but if they were gonna do it, it would have made much more sense if Michael himself has no interest in them, and in fact, probably ends up killing them later on, since evil really shouldn't have any true allegiance. But there could be a cult that tries to control him / worship him, that are also evil, and maybe they even try to give rationality or some sort of religious belief to why Michael is the way that he is, and maybe some of them even seek to have his immortality for themselves as well. But if it was written correctly with all this stuff, then all their theories and beliefs would never have been confirmed nor denied by the time that they too would have been killed. What I'm saying is a cult being in a Halloween film could have been interesting, but instead it fucking ruins Michael Myers as a character in this movie, and frankly, kind of goes nowhere too, at least in the theatrical cut. See, Loomis has a colleague that is introduced in this film named Dr. Wynn, and he's also interested in Michael's case, and I don't know, I don't think it's that shocking to say that he is actually a bad guy, and he is working for the Cult of Thorn. Actually, more interestingly, he is revealed to be the leader of the Cult of Thorn, using Michael's evil as a way to harness supernatural forces through scientific experimentation and ritual, with Jamie's baby intended to be the final sacrifice in this ritual, I guess. To what end? Fuck if I know. But they have Michael in a comatose state at the Smith Groves Sanitarium, the very place where Michael was held for 15 years before in his childhood, where the finale of the film finally plays out. Tommy and Kara rescue Danny and Jamie's baby, who were also kidnapped by the cult at some point before this. Michael breaks free from the cult's control and slaughters its members in a violent rampage through the hospital corridors. In one of the film's bloodiest sequences, he kills doctors, nurses, and cultists alike, effectively destroying the organization that created him. Tommy, Kara, and Danny and the baby flee, but Michael pursues them into a surgical room, and Tommy attacks him using tranquilizers and a lead pipe, repeatedly beating him until he collapses. The group then escapes as Loomis stays behind to finish it, the movie ending very ambiguously and open-endedly, as we hear Dr. Loomis's screams, probably from him dying, almost as if it's screaming for a sequel that, spoiler alert, never came, and for good fucking reason. This movie is a mess. Mind you, there are a couple of good things in here, like I do really like the plot point of Tommy Doyle all these years becoming obsessed with Michael Myers, especially since he saw him firsthand and seemed exactly like the type of kid who would then come to obsess over Michael Myers and the entire encounter for some time after. Plus, I do really like the idea that anyone who comes to encounter Michael Myers and manages to live to tell the tale sort of lives with the curse of having borne witness to a pure evil in the shape of a man. You could even call it the curse of Michael Myers, eh? Yeah, they also got the mask looking at least a lot better here than it was in the other two films. The bestest look since the original two for sure. Also, much of the cinematography and lighting in the film is good. It's all really well done. And I even like the scene where Tommy faces Michael Myers again for the first time in like nearly 20 years. Too bad this is all wasted on a truly terrible film overall. Though before I rated, I suppose I should note what the differences between this and the producer's cut are. Does the producer's cut manage to fix the film in any significant way? No, not really at all. The movie was originally directed by Joe Chappelle and produced by Paul Freeman under the creative guidance of the series co-creator Mustafa Akkad and screenwriter Daniel Ferrens. After the film's first test screening in 1995, audience reacted really poorly to the movie, especially to the slower pacing and supernatural cult storyline. The studio, Dimension Films, panicked at this point, ordering extensive reshoots and edits to make the film faster, bloodier, and more in line with early 90s slasher trends. The result of this was that the producer's cut was extra focused on the paranormal cult stuff, and is often described as a more gothic horror film, while the theatrical cut that most people saw and are aware of is more intense and has a quicker pace. More details and lore about the Cult of Thorn is in the producer's cut as well, which while I hate the concept of, I'll admit having that lore there at least feels more in line with what the original vision was for the movie, which feels like a strange but still equally dumb afterthought in the theatrical cut. Jamie also lives a bit longer in the producer's cut, but still ultimately is killed, this time via gunshot wound to her head in a hospital bed. Loomis also plays a larger role in the producer's cut, which is mostly due to all the reshoots cutting many of the scenes of him in them, as well as before they did reshoots, Loomis's actor, Donald Pleasance, sadly passed away, meaning that this would be the last film he would ever play in. A real shame, but then I suppose it is actually pretty cool to see his last performance more in the producer's cut. Also, the ending is totally different, with Michael being defeated by like a ritual rune written up by Tommy, paralyzing him in place, which I guess does make more sense since it is connected with the whole rune thing and Tommy was super obsessed with that. And then Dr. Wynn, disguised as Michael, escapes the facility, but not before passing the Curse of Thorn on to Dr. Loomis, meaning that he would be forever connected to Michael Myers until the day he dies, or maybe the evil has infected him in some kind of way. I'm gonna be real, I don't really fucking know what it means all that much, but he's clearly not happy about it, and yeah. But on the whole, the producer's cut is still what I would call the real vision of the movie, because while I may still not really like it, it is at least coherent and commits to the bit, while the theatrical cut is fucking completely nonsensical at times and only half-asses the cult concept. But the thing is, that's still too much anyway, but without the balls to at least commit to it. So for that reason, the theatrical version of this film gets a solid F for being a bad doo-doo shit film, and completely missing the point of what Michael Myers in this series should really be about. And the producer's cut gets a D for also being a bad doo-doo shit film, but with at least the original creative intent. But with that, the original timeline of Halloween is officially over, as no real sequels to this timeline ever came out, thankfully. So now we move on from the Thorn trilogy onto the Dimension Films continuity, starting with Halloween H2O, 20 years later, released in 1998, sees the return of Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode, and starts a new timeline that completely ignores the Thorn trilogy films, and is instead a direct sequel to Halloween 2, where 20 years later, a PTSD-ridden Laurie Strode has faked her own death in order to go into hiding from Michael Myers. Since then, Michael's body apparently disappeared from the hospital after being engulfed in flames, but he is still presumed dead. Laurie has a son named John, and she is the headmistress of the Hillcrest Academy, a private boarding school, where she is supported by her secretary, Norma Watson, and guidance counselor, Will Brennan, with whom she is in a relationship with. Despite the normal life she has built for herself, the traumatic events of her past have caused her to suffer from chronic nightmares, as well as becoming an alcoholic, living in fear that her brother will one day find her, something that causes her to have nightmares, not celebrate Halloween, and also pass some of her stress and trauma onto her son, who is kind of done being scared and just wants to live a more normal life. However, just as that year's Halloween comes around, Marion Chambers, Loomis's assistant from the first two films, returns to her home, only to find that it has been broken into, and the file on Laurie Strode has gone missing. She gets the help of two teenage neighbors to look around the house, but before long, all three of them are killed by Michael, who has returned and now knows where Laurie Strode is living and what her new name is. Thus, the movie is about Laurie coming to terms with her dark past and PTSD, her son John trying to be more of a normal teen and falling in love, and Michael coming to deliver death to them all. It's a pretty great setup for a sequel, I'll say, though it does call into question what exactly Michael was doing the last 20 years. I mean, I suppose he could have been recovering from being burned alive. Maybe he was just, doing the thing you would actually expect him to do, going around stalking and killing people. But since him killing his sister is such an important thing since Halloween 2, it does put into question what exactly he was doing that whole time. On another note, the general direction and vibe of this film is very, very in line with that of Scream, a film that came out in 1996. It was both a slasher film as well as a sort of meta dark comedy at times, talking about the formula of slasher films and being both a tribute as well as poking fun at the tropes that had come to define the genre. And it also, ironically enough, really pumps some new life and blood into the genre as well, with there being a ton of movies that came out that ended up being kind of Scream clones or Scream adjacent. Well, a lot of H2O has a lot in common with that film tonally, especially with all its references, the way that it's shot, and even the way some of the characters are written feels very in line with it. This has caused some people to call H2O a Scream clone, and I wouldn't go so far as to call it that, but honestly, as a huge fan of Scream, I don't really mind this at all. But at the same time, it does feel really different from every other Halloween film that had come out up till that point, and does feel very much of its time. The mask of Michael Myers here is, well, it's pretty strange. Apparently, when they first filmed the movie, it was going to look like this, but luckily they realized that this was an absolutely awful mask, and so they ended up having to scrap that and doing reshoots with this new mask, and at times even use a terrible CGI mask for a few shots that I guess they just couldn't reshoot. The new mask is okay. It looks actually pretty good. Only problem is that nearly every shot in the film we actually see Michael Myers' eyes, and as I said before, I really don't like that. And here it can even look a bit wonky and dorky at times. It's a shame because I've seen edits where they have the pitch black eyes for this mask, and if you see the difference, it's way scarier and actually really looks quite good with everything else and all the details of this particular mask. But unfortunately, the vast majority of the movie, the eye holes are just too big and you just see too much of his eyes. Again, I find that having the pitch black shadows for his eyes adds to the overall character design and just looks way damn better. But oh well. I will say that this film is still overall fairly good and well paced, especially its finale, which sees Laurie Strode and Michael face off in the school one-on-one. Laurie's character coming full circle, ready to face the evil that she's been kind of metaphorically running away from for her whole life, in a really cool game of cat and mouse. It's great stuff, accompanied by some great orchestral remixes of the classic Halloween themes, and a conclusion that feels like a great send-off to the series, with in the end Michael getting captured and reaching out his hand to Laurie, it being unclear if he's reaching out earnestly or trying to trick her. But either way, Laurie has had enough, and then cuts off his fucking head, ending the evil and the series with a nice bow. If you wanted, you could watch Halloween 1, 2, and then this one as its own little trilogy, and have it end all pretty well. A pretty nice send-off to the whole Michael Myers and Laurie Strode's sister story arc. Really, one of the only things I'd say is a weak point for this film overall is that Laurie's son John doesn't really get much to do. Him and his friends do have like a party later on, and this leads to like a whole violent scene where Michael ends up killing most of him and his girlfriend's friends. But in the final act, he's pretty much completely written out of the movie and doesn't have much to do. And so I think that's a bit of a missed opportunity. But on the whole, I would give H2O a solid A ranking. It's a fun time and a breath of fresh air after all of the cult stuff and just complete mismanagement of the series as a whole. That being said, there is another film in this continuity, and one that is often called the worst in the series. And that film is none other than Halloween Resurrection, released in 2002, is a pretty strange film overall. The plot takes place 3 years after the events of Halloween H2O. But you might be wondering, how did Michael Myers come back from getting his head cut off? Oh, well, that's simple. See, he wasn't really killed that way, because that wasn't really Michael Myers. That was a dude that Michael switched clothes with off screen to make his escape, and so the reason Michael reached out to Laurie that night was because it was a dude in a mask whose vocal cords were crushed by Michael. See? And so Laurie actually killed a totally innocent man at the end there. Why that man didn't just take off Michael Myers' mask at that point to show it wasn't really Michael Myers? Well, that's because that's a really good question. Doesn't this kind of ruin the finale of that film in general and feel a little bit like a complete ass pull? Yeah, and that's because it is. Let's just be real. But at any rate, because she killed a totally innocent man and Michael's still on the loose, this causes Laurie to have a total mental breakdown, and she has been sent to a mental hospital. And in the film's opening, Laurie is pretending to be comatose and heavily on drugs, but in reality, she's been sitting there waiting for Michael's arrival because she has set up a trap for him, I guess. Well, just as she expected, Michael eventually does appear, and it actually works. The trap actually traps him. However, before she can deliver the finishing blow, she has to know for sure that it's actually him this time by taking his mask off. Which is, actually an interesting choice, since I'm not sure if she would even really know what he would look like at this point, based on seeing his face. It's been a while since anyone's seen his face for, well, 20 years after all. Maybe she'd be looking for burn scars? Maybe weird wounds in the eyes? Though Michael doesn't appear to have been burned anywhere, and frankly, if we go by that logic, bro has both of his eyes shot out in Halloween 2, and he seems to be seeing just fine. In fact, we can see his eyes constantly in H2O. So we definitely know those eyes did heal. So you gotta assume that Michael has some kind of healing powers or something? I don't know, who fucking knows. But regardless, as she's trying to pull the mask off, she ends up getting trapped into the trap with him, and ultimately, Michael finally kills her. After all these movies, the Shape has finally killed Laurie Strode. And afterward, he gives his knife to a mental patient there, framing him for murdering Laurie Strode, and walking into the night. Now, the thing is, from here, you might have some idea as to where this sequel is gonna go. I mean, he killed her, but her son is still alive, right? So surely that's his next target, right? Nope. In fact, Laurie's son is not brought up at all, and is never seen again. The family murder angle seems to have been completely dropped. And now Michael's new goal in this movie is to, go live in his old family house in the basement and eat rats. Okay, I guess. Well, then the actual plot of the film happens. That being a year later, when a bunch of college students, with our main lead being this girl named Sarah Moyer, end up winning a competition to appear on an internet reality show called Dangertainment, directed by Freddie Harris and Nora Winston. Freddie being played by Busta Rhymes and Nora being played by Tyra Banks. The students gotta spend a night in the old Michael Myers house and figure out the mystery as to what led him to, killing people, I guess. All while they are equipped with head cameras for a live stream in what has gotta be one of the earliest films to make streaming a central part of its plot, before it was really all that feasible back in the day. At any rate, this is supposed to be a haunted house kinda scare prank type thing thingy, but little do they know, or the show's hosts know, that the real Michael Myers is still living here, ready to kill them all. And that's the basic concept of the movie. And here's the thing, listen, this movie is really fucking bad. It's very corny, has some of the most dumb goofball shit ever by its finale in particular, and it overall feels like such a strange departure from the series. Like it was almost supposed to be a different movie, but they just decided to insert Michael Myers into it. Not to mention how dumb its opening is and how they kind of just kill Laurie Strode off without much fanfare. I mean, I guess there's a little bit, but it just kind of feels like an afternote when the rest of the movie has nothing to do with her or her family or really any of that stuff. Not to mention the complete ass pull that they made just to get the movie going to begin with. And all the development from Laurie Strode and her son and all the different relationship dynamics just being completely dropped for this new film to exist. And for all those reasons, it is objectively a mess and a spit in the face to anyone who was actually invested in anything that happened in H2O, and it largely feeling like the series has openly jumped the shark, if it didn't already do that back in The Curse of Michael Myers, that is. But here's the thing, I still kind of like this movie. I know that's a very controversial opinion, and trust me, I just laid out all the reasons why it is perfectly understandable to say it is a shit movie and why many people rank it at the fucking bottom of their rankings from what I have seen. But it's a movie that I would call a bit of a guilty pleasure for me. That is, if I was actually guilty of anything by liking it, that is. The film's concept of a bunch of people locked in a house streaming their experience in that really early tech fashion, the dialogue and pacing that feels, again, very Scream movie-esque, and the idea that Michael is just kinda here to kill people and it's not really part of a larger narrative. I don't know, there's just something about it that I just kind of find fun in its own kind of way. Not to mention, it has a really dumbass finale that I admittingly find really fucking funny. All combined into what I can only describe as a really dumb fun film that I personally will always have a bit of a soft spot for. It's horror movie trash and kind of reminds me of Friday the 13th movies, in that most Friday the 13th movies at some point kind of stop being good movies, but are still fun movies. Sort of horror movie comfort food in a weird way. It honestly kind of makes you wish that the film wasn't connected with H2O, so that it didn't ruin its ending and have all the baggage of being connected to that. Hell, I'm surprised they didn't just end up having this movie take place between those 20 years of the second film and Halloween H2O. It was prime for the picking, and no one would have complained since everyone was wondering what he was doing during that time anyway, especially since he could have been targeting other people that whole time. There could have been entire movies or stories that take place during that era, actually. But regardless, as its own little story, I kind of find Resurrection to be a bit charming, and how much it feels like it was supposed to be a completely different film that just so happens to have Michael Myers just kinda there in it. I also really like the part where the character of Sarah needs help from her online boyfriend, Deckard, who is also watching the live stream, to tell her where Michael Myers is as she tries to escape from his clutches. It's a cool scene, and then is followed up by a finale where fucking Busta Rhymes fights Michael Myers in a fiery arena with karate while saying shit like this.
Trick or treat, motherfucker.
Is it really, really dumb? Yes. Is it completely kind of disrespectful and takes away all the aura of Michael Myers and all that? Yeah. But is it pretty funny? Admittingly, yes. But for sure, as a Halloween film, this is kind of probably the series' lowest moment, I would say. It all kind of being reduced down to a simple joke. On the whole, I'd say this movie probably should get an F. Objectively, it deserves an F. But for me, it's gonna get a C. By no means is it great, but it's at least entertaining. Oh, and I guess since I mentioned it in every other movie, the mask here in this one is not great. I really don't like that they thinned his eyebrows out so much, and his lips being pursed like that is so weird. I can't tell, like, what exactly they were going for here. It almost feels like Michael Myers is, like, giving an expression of stern disappointment, or is just super duper constipated or something. I don't know. It's a bad look. That being said, that is where this timeline in the franchise ends, and where we now move on into remake territory with Rob Zombie's Halloween, released in 2007, marks the first and only reboot of the whole series, and there's a lot to discuss here. At its core, Rob Zombie's Halloween is one of those films that I have changed my mind on a lot over the years as time has gone on. But at its core, if you have ever seen a Rob Zombie film, you would know that his movies are dark, gritty, very violent. They often have a bit of a southern, violent hillbilly sort of aesthetic, very Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and usually have a bit of a nihilistic note in general, sometimes with a bit of a dark comedic undertone. Bearing all that in mind, Zombies Halloween differs immediately from the original, and that it starts off with Michael Myers' backstory, him coming from a broken home, his dad, who is abusive to everyone, berates them.
Bitch, I will crawl over there and I will skull fuck the shit out of you. That's all that fucker does is cry.
A sister who also makes fun of him and says stuff like this.
They're chicken abortions and they're fucking gross.
Stop jerking off in there.
Get away!
I'm not listening.
And a mom who he loves and who loves him, but whom also is a source of ridicule from bullies at school because his mom has to work at a strip club as a stripper in order for the family to make ends meet, and he himself having a fascination with animals, specifically torturing and killing them. So this is a significant change already, because as I know before in the original film, Michael came from what looks like a normal household and seemed to kill his sister Judith for seemingly no reason, him being an embodiment of pure evil without any motive. He is the emotionless shape, and here I think it would be pretty disingenuous to call Michael Myers the Shape in Rob Zombie's Halloween films. Instead, we have what could be considered a more realistic depiction of what could break a child and have them kill their own family. Well, I say realistic, but everything is so over the top and bad that I'd argue it kind of turns into a complete cartoon of what probably a edgy teenager would say is a realistic depiction of someone turning evil. Nonetheless, the first third of the film is focused on Michael's childhood, and him eventually breaking and deciding to kill the bully who made fun of his mom, tape up his dad and kill him too, and then finally his sister, even wearing the iconic mask since it was something that her boyfriend wore this time around. Michael ultimately sparing his mom and little sister though, since he loves them both, and then he ultimately gets sent to a mental institution to be overseen by Dr. Loomis, who this time is definitely much more cold and doesn't seem to really be the same character that we know from the original. And also, on top of that, Michael has a new obsession with making and wearing masks. At first, he seems to be doing okay, before one of the nurses says this line,
"Cute baby. Couldn't be related to you."
which results in her getting her eye stabbed out by a fork near him. Gotta say, that was quite the dumb thing to say to a psychotic child who murdered half of his family. And this causes Michael's mother to realize that her son will never leave that facility, and so she then offs herself and leaves her baby daughter, Lori, to be adopted. And since then, Michael stopped talking, never speaking anymore. Silence now being recontextualized as his anger, and perhaps last parts of his humanity dying away. After this, there is a time skip where Loomis gives up on Michael, convinced there is nothing he can do for him. And then that night, Michael manages to escape his cell because, well, there's a couple different versions of how this happens, but I think it's Only best to note that the more crazy version of how he ends up escaping is because two night guards end up taking another mentally ill woman and graping her in Michael's cell, causing him to kill them and then escape into the night, heading back to Haddonfield to kill anyone in his way and find his baby sister and maybe kill her, question mark. Only then, halfway through the film, are we introduced to Laurie and co, and the rest of the movie plays out like a super sped up version of the original film, albeit with very different character personalities for the main three girls, and the kills and everything being far more violent. Now, here's the thing. On the whole, this film was never meant to just be the original movie. Carpenter himself told Zombie to make the film his own, and so Zombie did, albeit apparently Zombie kind of lied about how Carpenter treated him, and Carpenter later on noted that he felt like Zombie kind of missed the point of the original, etc., etc. But regardless, Zombie decided to focus on Michael Myers being the core protagonist, and that's because, as he has noted many times, he is a person who always identified with the monsters in monster movies when he was a kid, seeing them as an outcast or whatever, sort of like him. And so he wanted this movie to focus on Michael Myers. And that is definitely an interesting perspective, but because of that, it kind of feels like we're supposed to sympathize with Michael Myers, and in some way, kind of feels like everyone else is an antagonist to him at some point. I mean, think about it. Michael first goes on a killing spree, killing a truly evil, cruel bully, killing his fucked up evil dad, who didn't seem to have any redeeming qualities, and then killing his older sister, who I suppose didn't do nearly as much wrong. But this is then followed up by Michael killing a nurse who said something fucked up to him, and then him literally killing two evil rapists to escape. While not every target was deserved, and certainly later on there are people who definitely didn't deserve the fate they end up getting by Michael Myers, and you could argue that he shouldn't have killed any of them, maybe besides the rapists, I can't help but feel like we're supposed to be rooting for Michael, at least a little bit. Maybe the movie wants us to feel conflicted with that. I'm not sure, but this POV from Michael's perspective is then broken almost immediately as Laurie becomes the protagonist again, and it just all feels really jarring. Actually, it reminds me of something. It reminds me of creepypasta stories. You know the ones. Jeff the Killer, Tiki Toby, the Bloody Painter. These stories of a kid who was bullied and handed a bad thing after bad thing over and over again until they snap and kill everyone around them, with their backstory and their snap almost feeling like the main point of the story rather than the monster and slasher story that comes afterward. And again, their snap almost feeling like a catharsis, like it was all kind of part of the point. It's a type of story that I actually kind of have grown to love, mind you. It's a unique, edgy as fuck type of storytelling that is, again, kind of comfort food for me at this point. Is it very scary? No. Not really at all. And I've said before that I have a feeling most creepypasta of that variety actually took heavily inspiration from this Halloween remake in particular. And in a bubble, I can say, if I look at this film like it's the Jeff the Killer type creepypasta story given the form of a Halloween film, I do kind of understand and maybe even like it a little bit more. It's also clearly its own thing, at least most of the time. But it could still be a lot better though, especially since I think it still would be far scarier if Michael came from a more normal-ish home, but that it was just him who was really messed up. I also think that if you're gonna have Michael come from such a dark place, I really wish that the characters in the second half of the film were more innocent, or at least far more normal and not so sexually charged and edgy. I get that Laurie's friends in the original were kinda that way, but she always was more reserved, and I think it made her dynamic with them a lot more interesting, made for better dialogue. Whereas here, I'm gonna be real, so many of the characters feel way too similar to each other. Everything is a cynical, sexually charged, constantly swearing dumbass, Some are more than others, but it's what they all have in common, and it's kinda just cringy as hell at some point. But again, looking at this in a vacuum, this film is so edgy, so over the top and dark, that it again reminds me of my favorite dumb creepypastas, and that has softened me up to the film a bit over the years, especially now that we have newer Halloween movies that don't make these the de facto end of the franchise. But it doesn't soften me enough to call this a truly great movie by any means though, but just that I can find some entertainment within it. I'll also say on the positive, I do really like the mask for Michael in this one. There is actually some shots where it looks really damn good, and it helps that the actor, Daryl Carolot, who is a retired wrestler and like 6'8", is built like a shit brick house, and brings a legitimately intimidating and imposing shape to, well, the shape. The film is also generally very well shot, and the use of remixes of the original Halloween OST is done super well here in this film. Also, the final chase scenes between Laurie and Michael are also really well done, and some of the best parts of the film in my opinion. There was a time when I was super disillusioned and kind of pissed about this film, because it led to a sequel that we're going to talk about in a minute, and years of nothing more from the series. And I suppose as I came to appreciate the original film all the more I felt like this one was a spit in the face of what made that one work to begin with. With time though, I'd say this was clearly just a different take on the concept. Do I like this one as much as the original? Definitely not. But I can sort of enjoy it for what it kind of does on its own, you know? And I have to admit something to myself. If this wasn't a Halloween movie, and if it was just a insert random killer movie with a backstory and the stuff to boot afterward, I would probably be more receptive to it. It's just that it is a remake of the original Halloween, and thus I kind of have to compare it to that. And so for all these reasons and more, I personally am going to give Rob Zombie's Halloween a solid B. But now I think it's time that we talk about this film's sequel. Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, released in 2009, has gotta be one of the most controversial entries in the series, and for good reason. Because it's really, well, fans of it would probably say it's really different. That's true. I would personally also say it's really bad. You see, this movie is laden with symbolism. You know this because the movie tells you what the symbolism that it's going to be using throughout the movie is gonna be about, noting, quote, white horse, linked with instinct, purity, and the drive of the physical body to release powerful and emotional forces like rage with ensuing chaos and destruction, unquote. Thank you, Zombie. I'm not sure I would have known what the movie was trying to say if he didn't spell it out before it even started. On a serious note, the film starts with Laurie being taken to the hospital the same night when the last film ended, which ended with both Laurie and Michael falling down from a balcony together, and her shooting him in the face and screaming. Now, she's in the hospital kind of like how she was in the original Halloween 2, but she's far more messed up in this movie, and her injuries are shown in brutal detail. However, all the same, it doesn't take long before Michael reappears at the hospital, tearing through orderlies and nurses in a visceral and quite brutal fashion. He then chases Laurie through the halls in a rainstorm until finally cornering her in a guard shack, where she wakes up just as she's about to get killed, revealing that it was all a nightmare, and that it's really actually been 2 years later since that original attack on Halloween night. With Laurie having major PTSD and having to deal with what happened that night, everyone she knows being dead. Meanwhile, Michael Myers has been living life as a bum for the last 2 years, killing random people, eating animals, and well, looking like this. His mask, now tattered, and him sporting a rather large beard, which, to me, looks kinda dumb. I get what he was going for here with him being homeless and stuff, but I wish the mask stayed the same. Instead, it was now even harder to see his eyes or something like that. But regardless, Laurie lives with Sheriff Brackett and his daughter Annie, both survivors of Michael's rampage. On the surface, she's trying to rebuild her life, but she's clearly unraveling at the seams, plagued by her PTSD, panic attacks, nightmares, and violent outbursts. She's also grown rebellious and angry, covered in tattoos and living off of anti-anxiety meds, and hanging out with her new friends Mia and coworker Harley, who seem to be a rather bad influence on her as well. She's also being haunted by reoccurring visions of her mother, Deborah Myers, often accompanied by a younger version of herself and a massive white horse. A vision that Michael also seems to keep having as well, tying in with that aforementioned white horse symbolism from earlier. The mother calls to Michael to reunite the family. If this is literally a ghostly figure from the afterlife, a purely psychological thing that connects both Laurie and Michael, or whatever else, it's never very clear. All the same, as Halloween approaches, Michael begins another bloody trek back to Haddonfield, killing anyone who he crosses paths with. Meanwhile, Dr. Loomis in this film is pretty much a complete and total piece of shit. Gone is the likable character who fought evil and tried to save lives, though he wasn't really much of that in the first remake either. And now we have this very pompous celebrity touring with his new book about Michael Myers, called The Haddonfield Tragedy. He's now arrogant, mean to anyone who he sees as beneath him, and even blames Laurie's trauma on weakness and exploiting the murders for pure fame. Though it is obvious that Loomis sort of stands in for how the media often portrays and romanticizes and exploits real-life murder and crime like this for their own personal gain and money. I get that, and I do agree with the satirization and I guess the message, I suppose. And it is kind of an interesting angle to take of a Halloween film, especially a sequel, but at the same time, it also just sort of feels like another look at like how everyone's bad and everything's nihilistic and there are no good people in a Rob Zombie movie. Yeah, but I'm saying I guess I get what the intent of this direction for the character was. At any rate, eventually as Halloween night approaches, Laurie has visions through Michael's eyes, killing people, and it's only through Loomis's new book that Laurie finds out that she is, in fact, Michael's long-lost sister. This revelation completely shatters her, and she becomes erratic and violent, terrified that she's becoming like Michael. That night, Laurie, Mia, and Harley attend a Halloween party, and Michael returns to Haddonfield, brutally killing his way through locals and police, including her friends once again. Laurie flees into the night as Michael closes in, and eventually captures her and takes her to an abandoned barn, where his mother apparition awaits. There, Laurie hallucinates Deborah Myers, young Michael, and the white horse, commanding her to say goodbye to her former life, to the outside world. However, it appears that Michael and Laurie are simply sitting silently in the barn, surrounded by police. There are two versions of the ending to this one, but I'm gonna be real, they both end the same way, with Michael being killed, same with Dr. Loomis, and Laurie either being dead or being not dead, but either way, she's in like some kind of mental institution of her own mind, or maybe it's purgatory, or heaven or hell, I don't fucking know, and it ends with her smiling, giving into her madness completely, and I suppose the family all being reunited, etc. Regardless though, this film is just way too mean-spirited, way too one-tone as well, way too nihilistic with how nearly every single person Michael kills in this film ends up almost always being some total piece of shit, or a pedo or something like that. It all just gets to be a little draining if I'm gonna be real. Not to mention, I'm sorry, but I very rarely say this about a movie, but this one is just way too pretentious and way up its own ass, with nothing to really show for it. It seems like it wants to be about something deeper, to show something, to say something, but it just never really does. I guess it is unapologetically a Rob Zombie film, and there are even a few scenes that do look pretty cool, like some of the dream sequences are pretty damn cool looking. Seem like something right out of a music video. Makes sense since it's Rob Zombie directing, I suppose. And the opening hospital scene, despite it just being a nightmare sequence, is actually pretty good as well. But any of the good things from the first film feel either tired here or just just not well done in my opinion. I feel like I personally would have preferred if Michael was on a killing spree for a long time away from Laurie or something, moving from town to town, becoming more and more an entity of pure evil. That maybe at some point, what brings Laurie to Michael is actually her realizing that he's her brother and wanting to stop him. Also, bold choice, but maybe Michael should have worn a few different masks for this film, since he's like doing that in this version of the universe anyway, thus always changing his face, his shape, in some kind of way, maybe ending on him eventually wearing a fresh version of the original mask as he finds himself in Haddonfield once again or something. Hell, even if you want the white horse symbolism, just have it be something Laurie sees, not something Michael sees. I prefer us not delving into his mind as much. I get that, again, in the remake, we delved into Michael Myers' past a lot, but it just comes off as really strange here. And again, to me, that would have given Laurie much more to work with as an arc. Even if she's still losing it, she doesn't want more people to die or suffer like she and her family and friends have, giving her a little bit more agency, you know? She wants to confront Michael and save her friends and family, rather than Michael coming to her. Hell, it could have even been interesting if Michael kind of actively avoided her after their encounter in the first film, seeing that she pretty well rejected him by shooting him in the face, and maybe now he just would prefer to leave her alone or something. But enough writing fanfiction. Overall, this film could have been good or at least better than what it was, but overall, I personally think this movie is just not that interesting. And while it is indeed different, being different doesn't automatically mean good. And personally, I'm going to give this film a D. I could have almost given it a C for being a unapologetic creative vision if nothing else, even if I really don't like that creative vision. And I know this one has gotten fans over the years as something truly out there. But honestly, above all else, I also just find this movie really, really boring, and super anticlimactic as a finale to the other one. And that's perhaps the worst sin that you could have than any other in my books. But with that said, the Halloween franchise would then go on a long hiatus after this point, before coming back swinging with Halloween 2018. So, after a long 9 years of the series going into a nice long slumber, one that was perhaps needed after going through a whole remake, come 2018, we would end up getting the David Gordon Green directed Halloween, which, unlike every other film besides the zombie remakes, this film would serve as a direct sequel to John Carpenter's 1978 original, ignoring all previous sequels, remakes, and alternate timelines. And yes, that means for the first time since the original Halloween, Michael Myers is not Laurie's brother. He once again has no motivation and is simply the shape once more. This film takes place 40 years after the original, Michael Myers having been caught that fateful night after disappearing into the night. The film starting with two true crime podcasters, Aaron Corey and Dana Haynes, visiting Smith Road Sanitarium to interview the infamous serial killer Michael Myers, who has been institutionalized since his 1978 killing spree. Michael has not spoken a word in 40 years. In the courtyard, surrounded by other inmates, Aaron presents Michael with his old white mask in an attempt to provoke a reaction. The tension rises, the music builds, and the other inmates grow agitated and scared, but Michael remains silent, all shot and directed in a super dramatic fashion, which is sort of true for this whole film. While it is a direct sequel to the original, the movie really carries with it the drama like this is the return of a great evil that we have for so long forgotten about. The opening credits echoing this with the deflated and rotted pumpkin being revived to its original form. It being symbolism that the franchise is coming back after a long slumber. It also being a true return to form, with it now being a direct sequel to the original film, as well as that of Michael himself, the shape once more returning. Anyway, the podcasters then end up visiting Laurie Strode who has been living in a house nearby, and this is probably the most interesting version of her character yet. Laurie's life has been consumed by her trauma. Her obsession with Michael destroyed her personal relationships, including her marriage and custody of her daughter Karen. Karen, who is now an adult, resents her mother's paranoia and survivalist upbringing. She lives in Haddonfield with her mild-mannered husband Ray and teenage daughter Allison, who is caught between sympathy for her grandmother and the frustration of her mother's denial. Laurie lives alone, surrounded by guns, equipment, ready for the day evil should ever come back into her life, reflecting both the effect that Michael, the shape of evil, can have on one person, but also symbolically what bearing witness and being a victim to evil can do to someone, fill them with PTSD, cause them to self-isolate, push others away, prepared for that evil to come back, even if it should never come back again. When the podcasters meet Laurie in her fortress of floodlights, traps, and weapons, Laurie reveals that she's been waiting her entire life for Michael to escape, so that she can kill him herself. Allison later tries to reconcile the family by inviting Laurie to dinner, but this ends awkwardly when Laurie breaks down in tears after drinking too much, overwhelmed by the lingering fear of Michael's shadow over her life, as well as him getting moved to a new facility. And during that very prison transfer on October 30th, Michael Myers is being moved to a maximum security facility. On a dark rural road, the bus crashes and the inmates, including Michael, all escape. A father and son encountering the crash, both of which being the first new victims of Michael, as he steals their truck and makes his way to Haddonfield. Later on, Aaron and Dana stop at a gas station. Unbeknownst to them, Michael is already there, and a brutal scene where Michael murders the mechanics and the podcasters plays out, complete with a really gnarly scene of him showing the teeth of the car mechanic to Dana as she's in the restroom, before then finally retrieving his iconic mask from their car trunk and placing it back on his face, allowing for the rebirth of the shape once more. And I'll say up front that I love how the mask looks in this film. It looks both so much like the original, finally after all these years, with his eyes almost always being in complete darkness, again, finally, but at the same time, the mask is also old and weathered. Though, admittedly, not nearly as weathered as it would be realistically IRL, but in a way that reflects both the age and passage of time, and I think also as a reflection of those, in particular Laurie, and their trauma and stress for all those who have been cursed to bear witness to the shape. This then leads into the rest of the film, following both Michael on a new killing spree, including a really cool set of scenes where the camera continues unbroken as Michael makes his way through Haddonfield, stalking and killing people effortlessly, making it his personal playground. While at the same time, Sheriff Frank Hawkins, a deputy during the 1978 massacre, discovers the bodies and joins the hunt with Dr. Sartain, Michael's current psychiatrist, who claims to want to understand the mind of evil. Laurie then hears of the news of Michael's escape and tries to warn both Karen and Allison of this, but Karen refuses to believe her, and Laurie intercepts Hawkins to join in the search for Michael. All while Allison deals with some teenage relationship drama at a Halloween party, and on her way home, Michael's silent carnage unfolds around her. The film does a great job at pulling and pushing all the pieces into places, as Laurie desperately hunts Michael, and after a series of great scenes, including a babysitting scene with tons of great suspense and actually some pretty fucking funny lines here and there. By the film's finale, Dr. Sartain is revealed to have his own agenda, and sort of sets up a conclusion with Michael and Laurie, since he believes that this will be the key to understanding Michael or something like that. But regardless, Sartain ends up getting his head stomped by Michael, and then, for the film's finale, we have a conclusion between Michael, Laurie, Karen, and Allison, 3 generations of Strode all together to fight this shape of evil that in one form or another has left a negative impact upon them. But Proceeds is without a doubt the best finale of the series, with a suspenseful and extremely brutal back and forth of cat and mouse, with several callbacks to the original film as well. It all ending with all 3 of them working together to defeat the evil, the house being revealed to not simply be a fortress, a prison, but rather a trap for the shape. them lighting it on fire and burning the evil, as all 3 generations make it out alive, scarred, but closer to one another than they once were, through facing the evil together. If you couldn't tell, I really love this film. At its core, Halloween 2018 is about the lifelong aftermath of trauma. Laurie Strode is no longer just a final girl, she's a survivor shaped by fear. Evil as a concept in the shape of a man is expanded upon so much more in this film, notably in how it creates generational trauma. Laurie represents unsolved survival trauma, Karen represents denial and repression, and Allison represents renewal, the hope to confront fear directly and end the cycle. Michael Myers is stripped of all backstory and motive once again. He's not Laurie's brother, not cursed by the cult of Thorn, not humanized. He is simply the shape, pure, random evil. Dr. Sartain's attempt to understand Michael and his ultimate downfall represents humanity's futile desire to rationalize evil. In the end, Michael kills without reason or emotion, making him terrifyingly unknowable. Halloween 2018 explores how the past also refuses to die, not just in Michael, but in those he's scarred. It's about how evil lingers, passed from generation to generation, until someone faces it directly. And by the end, 3 generations of women work together to destroy the man who terrorized them. The final act transforms Laurie's house into a trap, not a prison, a metaphor for reclaiming control over one's trauma and life. It's really great stuff. On top of that, John Carpenter returned to compose the score for this movie, as well as getting some help from his son Cody, reworking the classic Halloween theme with deeper, more ominous tones. Again, can't show you anything within the video, but it's some of the best tracks in the series by far. This is pretty much the type of sequel I always wanted from the series as I grew up and grew to love the original movie more and more. And I personally find it to be the most satisfying ending to the series, and it's why I put this film right up there in SS tier, in Halloween tier, right next to the original. And much like Halloween 2 or H2O, you can watch the original film and then watch this one, and have a great duology. You know, the more I think about it, the more I think this series kind of works like a strange visual novel as it's gone on throughout the years, where there are so many different paths and choices with how you could personally wish to see the series or watch it. Maybe you consider only the original to be canon, a purist. Maybe it's the Halloween plus 2 combo that does it for you. Or maybe Halloween 2 and H2O. Or maybe Halloween and the 2018 duology combo. Maybe you prefer it to be Halloween 1, 2, and 4, with how it truly emphasizes how evil can change its shape in a rather grim, dark fashion. Or maybe you're one of those very rare fans who loves the Thorn trilogy and likes everything that came from that. Maybe you like H2O into the Resurrection timeline. Or maybe you don't like any of this and you much prefer the Rob Zombie duology. But regardless, the thing is, Halloween 2018, while it certainly can work as a perfect bookend to the series, it ultimately has 2 sequels, both of which would end up dividing the fan base. So I suppose we ought to get to them both now, starting with this film's follow-up, Halloween Kills, released in 2021, picks up immediately after the events of the 2018 film. Laurie Strode and her family believe they have finally defeated the Shape, only for the fire department to come in and try to put out the fire, and Michael, in the end, just straight up escapes the trap somehow, walking out with one side of his mask charred up in what I will say is one of the coolest looks for the character. This is followed up by him brutally killing all the firefighters, setting the tone for Halloween Kills, that being an unfiltered rampage by Michael on the town, like we pretty much have never seen before. As the town learns of Michael's return, survivors from past encounters, including Tommy Doyle and Lindsay Wallace, again both the kids that Laurie watched over and protected that fateful night 40 years ago, band together to hunt down Michael, rallying under the chant of "Evil dies tonight," something which this movie is often made fun of for how much they yell this one single line. Meanwhile, Laurie Strode is in a hospital recovering from her wounds for the majority of this movie, as things start to spiral and Michael continues his rampage, and the mob grows more and more angry and frantic, and at some point ends up killing some other mentally ill dude who was clearly not Michael Myers, but who they thought was Michael Myers for some dumbass reason. While by the film's end, they all end up having a big fight with Michael Myers in the street, only for him to not be able to be stopped, the shape of evil, it seems, unable to be killed by normal means. And he ends up killing several key characters, including Tommy Doyle, who became kind of the mob leader in the film. And Michael even manages to kill Laurie's daughter Karen before disappearing into the night, setting things up for the final film to follow. You'll notice the description of this movie is a lot more brief than the others, and that's because, to be honest, most of the movie is very loose on plot. A lot of things happen, sure, but also they kinda don't. Truth be told, much of the film is about 3 core things, which I'll break down. The first being Michael's rampage, and I gotta admit, it's kind of formulaic here in a way that starts to get completely unsuspenseful, mainly because most of the victims are set up like this. Oh hey, here's this couple or group of people we've never heard of before. Now here's a scene or two of them showing some kind of strong personality trait, obsession, or hobby that they have. That way you can kind of remember them for something kind of rudimentary or surface level. And then, here comes Michael to kill them brutally in a violent fashion, rinse and repeat. This exact same formula happens so many times in the movie, you kind of start to see behind the curtain a bit, you know? You see the gears turning here, and it kind of feels like the writers only had one formula on how to get you to feel bad about a character's death. And while this was done a bit in Halloween 2018 as well, those characters were all mostly still connected to the main plot in some kind of way. And also, it was just one movie doing that, and so it was a little more forgivable. While here, they really are just random people, and it's kind of getting super repetitive at this point with it being 2 movies. And while I understand part of the point is to show Michael's rampage on random, innocent people, showcasing that evil can come into any home and destroy it, and that's cool and all, it's just done the same way every time. It just starts to make you feel like you know where everything's gonna end up going after a while, you know? The second point of the film is to say something about mob justice and the cyclical nature of violence and trauma. One of the central ideas of Halloween Kills is how fear spreads like a virus. When the townspeople of Haddonfield learn that Michael Myers has returned, their collective terror turns into blind rage. The chant, "Evil dies tonight," becomes a symbol of this hysteria, an emotional rallying cry that quickly devolves into chaos. Ordinary citizens transform into a violent mob, convinced they can end evil by force. But in doing so, they become reckless and cruel, again even targeting some random innocent man that they mistake for Michael. And the film suggests that this kind of panic-driven unity is self-destructive, blurring the line between good and evil. Perhaps also suggesting that in the pursuit of killing evil, it is easy for you to become a reflection of it yourself, notably if your mission is driven by fear and anger. But that's all nice and all, but the problem is that this film doesn't really land this theme very well, notably because the evil is quite literally killing tons of people as they speak all around the town. The pursuit of killing this evil serves the function of saving people's lives. It would be one thing if this was the theme after Michael had already disappeared into the night, and people were now afraid, much like Laurie, to live their lives because with every day that passes, the evil could return to take them or people that they love, etc. This eventually turning into some kind of mob justice against people who they deem to be dangerous in general, or could be another Michael Myers or something. Something that the third film almost, kind of, maybe does. But the problem is they want me to see these people as bad and unreasonable, when in the same few minutes of me getting this lecture about how these characters who are angry and scared are going too far and are definitely bad and mob justice is bad and whatever, we're then shown another scene of Michael Myers killing a bunch of innocent people who are just living their lives, and who are in fact not part of the mob. This just doesn't make the theme work at all. Like, should they all remain calm instead? I mean, I guess they could do that, surely, but also there are people actively being killed every single minute of the night. People who are people's friends and family and whatnot. I don't know, it just makes it all ring really hollow and makes me just kind of want to disagree with whatever the message that they're trying to give is. Like, yeah, the shape of evil literally walking around and killing everyone you know is pretty bad, but have you considered that maybe you being hysterical about it is actually kind of problematic too? Like, okay, thanks, that's really great theme and message. And I think somewhere along the line, they must have known that this just didn't make sense. And so that's why we get the whole scene where they're killing this innocent man. And it feels so dumb, so fucking forced, like they're just trying, like the writers are desperately trying to sell this theme to you, and it just doesn't work. It makes the movie all the worse for it. I like the idea of the whole town being haunted by Michael Myers, and maybe the shadow of his evil reflecting onto them in some sort of negative way. That's fine. But all this other shit just feels like a waste of time. Finally, the third thing this film is trying to set up is the final film. But fully going mask off, saying that Michael, the shape of evil, has no motive, that there's no means of understanding it, and it cannot be killed by normal means anymore. Again, following up the idea that he is a concept to the most extreme degree, where a whole town can beat him down, and he will still get back up, which I do actually quite like. I always wanted a sequel where this is more fully explored, the more paranormal yet mysterious nature of evil put to the test. The film is supposed to be about what Michael represents, and while that is cool, again, it is sadly done in such a messy manner that it feels like the writers just bit off way more than they could chew, resulting in a film that, while I enjoy some aspects of it, and it does have a little bit of a dumb, crazy slasher movie thing, because there is clearly like a lot of that in this movie, it really just doesn't all come together like the 2018 film did, which is sad because for this film to exist, it must undo the perfect ending of that film, and frankly it feels like they were holding their punches, like it keeps teasing a final conclusion with Michael and Laurie, but not in this one, but in the final film. It all just feels like a movie with some interesting ideas that just don't really go anywhere, and some that are just completely dumb and really should not have been the focus of the movie at all. But again, I do like the mythical nature of Michael Myers in this movie. He is definitely very scary, and I do like the flashback scene to 1978. That part looked actually really great. But yeah, on the whole, I'm gonna say this film deserves a solid B, because it could have been so much better, but ultimately, it's not quite as bad as some of the other stuff that came below that, because I at least find the movie entertaining, if nothing else. But then we have one more film to go. So get ready folks, because this one is somehow even more divisive than Kills. So let's end it all with Halloween Ends, released in 2022, feels like a huge departure in tone and story for this trilogy. Though at first it does have a premise that I actually really like, that being 4 years after the events of Halloween Kills, the town of Haddonfield is haunted not only by Michael Myers' massacre, but by a lingering atmosphere of paranoia and grief. Michael has mysteriously vanished, and the townspeople, traumatized and distrustful, have turned their fear inward, blaming one another for the evil that still lingers. And I do really like this concept. And furthermore, Laurie has some interesting development as well. She's now living with her granddaughter Allison and is trying to rebuild her life. She's writing a memoir and attempting to let go of her obsession with Michael, choosing to live with hope rather than fear. But Haddonfield's darkness hasn't gone away, it would seem. It's merely changed shape. After all, underneath her calm exterior, she's still haunted. The town blames her too. Some believe her obsession with Michael invited the evil to return, them going full fucking like supernatural and superstitious with it. And Laurie carries that guilt quietly, especially since mourns the death of her daughter. But they are not who most of this film is about, nor is it about Michael Myers all that much. Nah, the main character of this film is Corey Cunningham, a young man whose life takes a tragic turn when, while babysitting a boy named Jeremy, a freak accident leads to Jeremy's death. The town brands Corey a killer, ostracizing him, bullying him, making him a regular pariah, the trauma and isolation of which causes him a great deal of guilt, but also so too begins to warp his mind. Corey ends up in a relationship with Allison, as she seems to see something of herself in him. Both are broken people, searching for connection. Corey marked by tragedy, and Allison by generational trauma. Their bonds grow quickly into a romance, and for a moment, it seems both might find redemption in each other, and what have you. But then, one night, Corey is being bullied by a bunch of local teenagers and gets thrown off of a fucking bridge, only to then be dragged into the sewers by a figure lurking in the shadows. None other than Michael Myers, who is now in a weakened state, living much like a phantom underneath the town. Something unspoken passes between them at that point. It's as if Michael's evil infects Corey, or something like that, I guess. It's not really explained. And from that moment on, Corey changes. His fear turns to rage. His empathy dies, and Michael's influence, or perhaps the town, takes root in him. He begins to kill, not out of a compulsion, but of liberation. For Corey, murder becomes empowerment, a way to reclaim control over his life destroyed by others. The film positions Corey as some sort of new shape, suggesting that evil can be reborn in anyone who's consumed by pain and resentment, which is interesting. As Corey's descent deepens, he dons Michael's mask and begins a killing spree reminiscent of the original boogeyman. His victims include his tormentors, those who mocked him, and anyone who stands in his way. And it honestly feels a little bit like a Jeff the Killer creepypasta type story, but just not given to Michael, but instead Corey. However, Michael also starts going on a murder spree with Corey, like they're fucking Batman and Robin, but slasher villains instead. And at one point, Corey even overpowers Michael, which suggests, I suppose, that the evil is moving into a fresh, new form, perhaps? Maybe? I don't know. But meanwhile, Allison, desperate to escape Haddonfield's judgment and toxicity, plans to run away with Corey, but Laurie senses something wrong. She sees in Corey the same void that she once saw in Michael, and Laurie tries to warn Allison about this, but this just drives a wedge between them. This all results in a big confrontation where Corey, fully consumed by his dark transformation, decides to kill Laurie and frame her suicide as the final act of his tragedy. He breaks into her home, but Laurie is ready. In a tense, manipulative scene, she feigns suicide to lure him out, and then shoots him. Mortally wounded, Corey then offs himself, leaving the knife in his hand as Allison enters, making it appear that Laurie murdered him. So, there goes him, I guess. And then at that moment, once Allison runs away in anger, Laurie, perhaps now fully alone in all ways, Michael Myers returns for the final showdown. And the final battle is pretty good, it being pretty damn brutal, and while in my opinion it's not nearly as good as the confrontation in the 2018 film, it's still pretty good, and ends with Michael strangling and nearly killing Laurie, but Allison returns in time to save her grandmother. Together, they finish Michael off, slitting his throat and wrists, watching the life drain from him as she delivers a final speech about him not being the boogeyman, but just a sad man. This time, Laurie refuses to take any chances, so she straps his corpse to her car and leads a procession of Haddonfield residents to the junkyard, where they feed Michael's body into an industrial shredder, killing him once and for all. The movie ends with Laurie finishing her memoir. She reflects that while Michael Myers is gone, the evil he represented, fear, hatred, and darkness in people's hearts, will always endure. Yet she also acknowledges that healing is possible and that life must go on. The final scene mirrors the original Halloween from 1978, Laurie's home, but now peaceful, filled with soft light and silence. No more heavy breathing of the shape that once existed everywhere. So, here's the thing. There are aspects of this movie that I like. I do actually kind of like the Corey story. I think his slow descent into madness is well done and sort of reminds me of the movie Carrie. I like Laurie and Allison's character development, and I like the setting of the film and the tone, and I even like the overall message of the movie. But here's the thing, and it's a big thing. I really don't think this was the film to conclude this trilogy. It feels far too disconnected, too tonally different, and frankly at times it feels like the movie is blue-balling what people really want to see at this point. The end of the story of Michael Myers and Laurie Strode. And while the finale fight is pretty good, it also comes right the fuck out of nowhere, just at the end of the movie. And it comes at the expense of Corey's story, which ends up going absolutely nowhere. All that build up, all the story and focus on Corey being the protagonist of this film just kind of felt like a total fucking waste of time, because his story ends without any fanfare or payoff. No actual interesting end to his arc. Almost as if it was a B plot or something. But it's not. His story makes up like 85% of this movie's runtime. Michael is barely in it, and same goes for Laurie. And look, that would be fine if he actually played a role in the finale. If he became the new Shape. As controversial as that would be, at least it would have been something. If it ended up with him not becoming a Shape and instead sacrificing himself for Allison to ward off Michael, or maybe him and Michael end up teaming up to fight Laurie and Allison has to step in and there's some kind of conclusion with that? I don't know. But any one of those would have at least been something. But he just kind of decides to off himself and frame Laurie for it, which serves literally no fucking function in the plot besides getting Allison away from the house for a few minutes so Michael and Laurie can fight one-on-one, which then Allison comes right back after a few minutes anyway, and so that's it. Is that really all this character and story was made for? Then by the time we have Michael finally fully back into the picture, it feels like the movie is on its last legs. Like it just wants to hurry it up and wrap shit up. Like it was also just an afterthought. But if the main story of Michael and Laurie is an afterthought, and the Corey story is also not going anywhere and also just a afterthought, then what is the main thought of the movie? It seems to be nothing. And it starts to beg the question what the hell the point of this trilogy was. I feel like 2018 edited things out great. Kills was a pretty bad misstep, but it at least has some good ideas that could serve for a great finale. And then this movie just wastes everyone's time, and retroactively kind of makes Kills even worse because now we know that it's not just an in-between movie that leads into like the real finale, and now it just kind of serves no purpose either. It feels like the only story they had in mind was for Michael and Laurie to finish in a final fight and for everything else to end. And so for the rest of the movie, they just decide to experiment with stuff. And while that's fine to experiment, nothing wrong with that, I don't understand how they couldn't actually have the balls to commit to it then, rather than just giving up at the 11th hour, you know? If you want a movie about Corey becoming the new Shape of Evil, then fucking make him the new Shape of Evil. It's a shame because I had such high hopes for this movie, and this trilogy in general. And while I will always love Halloween 2018, these two films, after now altogether, while certainly far from the worst films in the series, as some have called them, they just feel like wasted time and missed potential in the end. And it's why I ultimately give the rank of D to this film. Not the worst film overall, but a major disappointment on nearly all fronts. Even if I like some of the ideas and feel like the overall direction is really good, they really shit the bed with the ending, and overall handling of Michael too. Since I get he needed to die for the last part of the trilogy, but to be honest, after Kills, it sort of feels like they established he was stronger than ever, and this final battle, while good, sort of feels like a retread of the 2018 film, which is baffling to me because with how important Corey is, I kind of was thinking that maybe he was going to be the core ingredient to actually killing the Shape. Like maybe he's someone who is pushed to the limits and starts to become the new shape of evil, but ends up sacrificing himself for people that he loves, like Allison. This could both be a great end to his arc, but come to be a more meaningful conclusion, in that while he was embodying the shape of evil, he ultimately sacrificed his own life for the love of another, which I think is something that you could use as a sort of symbolic rejection of Michael Myers and the evil that he represents. Thus, the evil is weakened, and Michael Myers is able to be killed. Something kind of like that. But again, I am writing fanfiction again and just ranting at this point. But yeah, that's where I place the Halloween films from best to worst overall. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed this ranking and a kind of retrospective on the Halloween franchise in general. As one more quick little roundup from bottom to top, we have in F category, Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers, the theatrical cut, because it is not only a terribly bad movie, but it's also a terribly bad movie that is made even worse by not even committing to the bit. Then in D tier we have Halloween 5, which was mostly put there because it kind of completely messed up the potential that was the sequel hook of Halloween 4 and is in general very boring. Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, the producer's cut, because it is also a terrible film. Again, almost just as terrible as the theatrical cut, just a little bit better by the fact that it at least sticks to its full creative vision. Halloween 2 by Rob Zombie is also in D tier. I actually debated putting it in F tier at one point, and on a different day maybe I would, but I decided to put it in D tier just because I felt like there was a couple things that at least made it an interesting watch. And then finally in D tier, we also have Halloween Ends. I actually debated putting that in C tier at one point, but thinking about it, and the more I have watched and thought about it, the worse this film gets. Especially after all the build up from 2018 and Halloween Kills, this just feels like a complete and utter waste of time. And honestly, I would put it in F tier if it wasn't for just the fact that it had a kind of cool Michael Myers final fight at the very fucking end, and for the fact that I guess I like some of the themes in it, and that's pretty much it. Then in C tier we have Halloween Resurrection, which again I know before is probably closer to a D or an F, but I have a soft spot for it, so I'm putting it in C. Then in B tier we have Rob Zombie's Halloween. Again, back in the day I might have put that in F tier, D tier, C tier, and maybe on a different day I would put it in C tier, honestly. But again, as its own little thing, just by itself, in a bubble, kind of like Jeff the Killer, the movie, but it's Michael Myers, and there's at least some kind of appeal in that. Halloween Kills is also one that I would debate putting into C tier as well, but I decided to put it into B tier because I at least like the stuff with Michael Myers in it. It's at least an entertaining movie on just a purely basic slasher film principle, even if it is thematically really fucking dumb. Then in A tier we have Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, which, as I know before, is a pretty damn good movie in of its own right, but is a little difficult to compare to all these other ones. And then also in A tier is Halloween H2O, which again is a great movie, and honestly the main thing that stops me from putting it into S tier is simply because I feel like the movie's a little bit too short, which is something I forgot to mention, and again for the fact that Laurie's son John kind of gets written out of the final act of the movie, which I personally found a bit disappointing. But overall, it's still a really good time and a good movie overall. Then in S tier, we have Halloween 2, which is just a great follow-up to the original Halloween, and overall, one of my personal favorites. It's a great one, with, again, probably some of the best chase scenes in the franchise. And then we have Halloween 4, which, again, the only thing that I really have against it is is the stupid looking mask, but on the whole, I really like this movie. I love the whole dynamic with Dr. Loomis. I like Jamie and Rachel both as characters and as a duo, and overall it's just a really strong film and feels like it lives up to both the second film and the first film. And finally, in Halloween, aptly enough, we have both movies other than Rob Zombie's titled Halloween, both the classic original for obvious reasons and the 2018 film because I feel like it lives up to it and is pretty much a perfect sequel in my opinion. But with that being said, that's just my ranking. What would your rankings of the Halloween franchise be? What would be at the top? What would be at the bottom? And for what reasons? Do you agree with my overall sentiments? Are there any that you particularly really disagree with? Let me know in the comments down below, as well as what future series, be they horror, franchise, anime, video game, etc., that you might like to see me do a ranking of in the future. But with that being said, I want to go ahead and take this opportunity real quick to thank all of my loyal patrons and channel members for continuing to support this channel and all that I do, including all my night eggs and my night owlettes, as well as a super special thank you to all my great night owls, including Emerald Frosting, Fujoshi Cake, Anon, Somber Devante 06, Hexmaniac Hannah, Spark Saturn, and Rugerhaver, as well as a super duper special thank you to all of my arch owls, including the Jolly Jeffrey Robery, the lovely Leanne Loves Christ, the Daring Daniel Petrie, the Radical Ray Kit Kat, and the Fearless Forgotten Ace. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you're looking forward to the other Halloween/spooky related videos that are coming out this month. If you're not aware of them, be sure to check my channel posts to keep updated. But until next time, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.